আপনারা দেখছেন 21শে টেলিভিশন।
On this World AIDS Day, we gather to remember friends and family lost to AIDS. But we can also rejoice in incredible hope for the future. The number of new HIV infections is reduced. The number of AIDS-related deaths is down. The number of people on treatment is up. For the first time, we can see the end to an epidemic that has brought such immense devastation around the world. For the first time, we can say that we are beginning to break the trajectory and control the epidemic. Soon, we will be able to announce an AIDS-free generation. The end of the epidemic will mean so much to so many. It will mean 0 people dying of AIDS and all people living with dignity and hope. Ending AIDS will mean celebrating birthdays instead of attending funerals. But make no mistake, stigma, denial, and complacency could still block our path. We must join our hearts and our voices. The end of AIDS is within our power. If we stay true to our vision, we will remember this as the day our dream began to transform into reality.
Hello dear viewers, I'm Masood Khan. Welcome you to Watch the Diplomats. The Diplomats is a kind of program where we talk about diplomacy, we talk about international relations, we talk about development, we talk about tourism, trade, culture, and so many issues we talk about. Today we have invited the country director of UNAIDS, Mr. Leo Kenny. Hello Mr. Leo Kenny.
Hello Masood, I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, first of all, let me ask you, when did you come in Bangladesh?
I've been here about 3 years. Almost 3 years. It's gone very quickly.
Oh yes. So how do you feel here in Bangladesh?
Well, I've found this one of the most fascinating postings that I've ever had. And, you know, I'll be very sad to leave here. I'll be leaving at the end of 2015. That'll be 4 years. So
Okay.
just enough time to fall in love with Bangladesh and its food and its people.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Leo Kenny. So before Bangladesh, which other countries you have served?
Pretty much all over the world, from sub-Saharan Africa, and I spent a lot of time in Geneva actually, but many countries, from Windhoek, Namibia to Harare in Kenya, and I've spent a lot of time in Somalia actually. But,
Somalia.
So yes, really quite a few places that I've been. I'm an old man now, Masood, and I've sort of been around a bit.
No, not yet. Okay, so you hail from Australia, I guess.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, excellent. So you served almost all African countries, mostly.
Yeah, well,
mostly.
no, Southeast Asia, and I spent a lot of time in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, in the Central and Eastern European countries. So I really have covered a number of countries because my first 10 years was with UNICEF, and I covered 27 countries. So.
Okay.
But now I think I prefer these sorts of postings where you're in charge of one country.
Excellent. You have got long experience. So, Mr. Leo, one thing I'm asking you about your organization, UNAIDS, if you could tell a little about the UNAIDS for the viewers.
Well, we are a secretariat, and it's a joint program on AIDS, and it consists of 11 entities. I won't name them all, but they're the usual suspects: UNDP and UNICEF and WHO and the World Bank. And the new one is UN Women, which reflects a very strong commitment to address, you know, the epidemic which disproportionately affects women and girls in the world.
Okay, okay, it's excellent. So, if you could tell this scenario in Bangladesh, the AIDS scenario in Bangladesh.
Yes, you know, unfortunately, Asia Pacific has seen a stagnation of efforts to get the prevalence of HIV, the new infections, down. You know, over the from 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13, we've seen a stagnation of new infections. Now, even in sub-Saharan Africa, we have seen, you know, up to 50% reductions in some of the very high prevalence countries. A lot of this has to do with access to antiretroviral treatment, and that is when treatment becomes a form of prevention, because it lowers the amount of HIV in the bloodstream. It's not easily transmitted, but more importantly, I think it brings people to services. And when you can do a continuum of prevention and treatment and care and support, that's the way to really address the epidemic. The bad news is this, Masood, that Bangladesh is one of, at the moment, I think 3 or 4 countries in Asia Pacific where we have not seen a stagnation of decline. We've actually seen a 25% increase in new infections.
If you could tell something, the global perspective, the data to the viewers,
Yes.
to know a lot about the...
Yeah. Well, as I say, globally, we've seen really quite a significant decrease in infections. As I say, I think that's because of access to treatment, but it's also because the world has got better at realizing that if you want to decrease infections, then you need to realize the rights of those who are most easily infected or bear the burden of the disease. Throughout the world, there are concentrated epidemics, a little bit like we have in Bangladesh. Although the majority of the world is it's through sexual transmission. But I think we should focus on Bangladesh, and where we find the source of infection in Bangladesh is from what we call most at risk populations or key populations, and they are people who inject drugs. They are male and female sex workers, transgender, Hijra populations, and these people also seem to be the people whose rights are trodden on most easily. And I think it's critically important that we've learned enough from the epidemic globally to understand that unless you make sure that you address the stigma and the discrimination which stops those people from accessing services, then you won't get anywhere in the struggle. And I think Bangladesh has made giant strides in that respect. You know, the good thing about Bangladesh, and the reason we believe that it is still maintained at a fairly low level. But our advice, you know, in the recent discussions, and Bangladesh has a very important voice because you're one of the largest LDCs in the world. So your voice is heard in New York. And, you know, again, we've consistently been saying, instead of pushing for specific goals and targets, and because that's horse trading, why don't we insist on the principles which don't just relate to HIV, but really relate to all of the sustainable development agenda. And I think there are 4 things that are important. And Bangladesh's voice can be very important in this respect. The first one is, make sure whatever goals you have, that they're based on inclusiveness. Make sure everybody is included. Leave nobody behind.
Oh,
We
yeah.
know that in Bangladesh,
Mhm.
too many people are excluded for lots of different reasons.
Absolutely.
The second one is ensure that all of these goals are based on human rights principles, because without that, it becomes horse trading. The
True.
third one is that gender equality
Mhm.
is
True.
absolutely critical if we're going to make giant strides in the
True.
post-2015 agenda. And the fourth one encompasses all of those. It's equity.
Mhm.
And Bangladesh knows about equity. So, I think I would like to see Bangladesh really insisting on principles rather than the details will be hammered out later on. But I think the AIDS response in Bangladesh really does throw a spotlight on where the cracks appear in human
Yeah.
rights, and AIDS is very good at exploiting those cracks.
It's very true. Thank you so much, Mr. Liokeni. So if you could tell something about detail about the scenario of Bangladesh, because in percentage-wise in Bangladesh, actually.
Look, the good news is that
Yeah.
the epidemic still remains amongst the general population below 0.1%. The bad news, of course, is that amongst some of the key populations, for example, in injecting drug users
Oh,
who
yes.
live in old Dhaka.
Old
A few years ago, our surveillance showed around 11%.
11%.
So that's very worrying. Now, because of targeted interventions, a few years ago that's been brought down to about 7%,
Okay.
and now we believe around 5%. So that
You're-
curve is going the
I'm
right
sure
way.
that you are working hard to reduce this
That's right.
percentage.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leo. With this, let's take a short break.
Okay.
Dear viewers, let's take a short break. Coming back soon. Viewers, again, welcome you to Watch the Diplomats. We are talking to the country director of UNAIDS, Mr. Liokeni. Well, Mr. Liokeni, if you could tell something, because you're living in Bangladesh for mostly 3 years. So within this time, you have seen Bangladesh. If you could tell something like your feeling, an impression about Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh.
Well, my wife worked here also, and recently she left to take up a post in Bucharest. And, we
So
worked...
she was ambassador of Sweden.
That's right,
Yeah.
yes.
We interviewed last time.
That's
yeah.
right, yes. So, we often collaborate on all sorts of things, and she was saying, what should we say? And what we honestly felt in our hearts was that Bangladesh has been the most fascinating posting we've had, one of the most challenging, sometimes the most frustrating, but we believe that Bangladesh has, and people hate hearing this word, but I'm going to say it, tremendous potential, and its people
Thank you.
are its potential. And we both very strongly believe that it's through the realization of human rights that potential is going to be released. We think there's tremendous potential here in women and girls. And I think that Bangladesh has made great strides, in starting to realize that. But there's a long way to go. There's still horrific levels that we see of violence against women. I don't know whether you saw recently a UNFPA report which outlined that over 75% of women have experienced violence in their lives. I mean, this is extraordinary. So until we address those things, that full potential of women in society will not be realized. But Bangladesh has made massive gains in the area of maternal and child health.
Yeah.
And you've already met MDG's parts of the 3 and 4. You've done a tremendous job on MDG 6. Where I believe Bangladesh is not making gains is in reconciliation, in accepting the past and looking forward to the future. I just don't see the level of dialogue between the political parties that I think most Bangladeshis want to see. I don't see that.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very much.
I don't think a lot of the international community
Very
sees
true.
it. But there must be dialogue if we're to move forward together. I think it stymies and really puts a brake on the massive amount of GDP that was wasted last year in Hatals.
Strike, yeah. True.
Yeah. So massive potential, which nobody likes the sound of potential, but still some major things to overcome. But I think all of my colleagues in the UN, all of our colleagues in the diplomatic community and development community, people feel very strongly optimistic about Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liokeni. One thing, in Bangladesh, you have got huge young people in this country.
Yes, yeah.
They're the strength of this country. So do you have any message for this young population, and how do you feel about the young population in this country?
Yes. Look, Masood, I fully agree with you. I think I said earlier on that well, I didn't actually, but I was mentioning women. Yes, young people. They are really the flag bearers of the development gains that need to be seen. I would say the most important thing, and what I don't see enough of, is setting the agenda for post-2015. I would like to see more young people's voices. It's going to affect them more than anybody else. We've been working with UNICEF and the National AIDS Program to put in place now a particular program on most at-risk adolescents. So remember I said at the beginning, leave no one behind?
Yeah.
That particularly applies to young people, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, the poorest, the ones without voice. They're the ones, I think, that really we need to concentrate on realizing rights for, without forgetting that the mass of young people in this country, they're the potential that I was really talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Liokeni. Your word of inspiration. I'm sure that our young population will be inspired so much by your words. And one thing more is, I'd like to ask you, have you traveled out of Dhaka? I'm sure. I mean, you travel countryside of Bangladesh.
Yes.
So how do you like? Dhaka is not Bangladesh.
No.
Yeah. So how do you like the other part? In Bangladesh. If you
yes. In fact, on not tomorrow, but the next day. We're going on field visits right to the northwest to Ranjpur and other places. One of my favorite places is Cox's Bazar because I'm
Cox's Bazar.
Yeah.
This is the longest sea beach,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a very keen surfer, so I have a couple of surfboards down there, and so I love Cox's Bazar. But it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. My plea is young people particularly. Well,
Mr. Liokeni, so you have said a lot about the young people of the country. So do you have any special message for the women? Because the women, again, very important part of the country. Keeping them behind, you can not expect the development of the country. So if you could tell something about the women of this country in particular.
Again, I would say leaving no one behind. The most vulnerable women, they are just as important, if not as important, as women ministers in a government, for example, or a number of parliamentarians. I think you have wonderful women leaders in this country, and they are as aware as anybody else of the need to hear women think differently. They tend to be more industrious.
True.
And it's very important to hear their voices. I think young women, if I go back to the AIDS response
sure,
again,
sure.
globally, for example, we've made tremendous progress on eliminating infections amongst kids through prevention of mother-to-child transmission, and paediatric infections have gone down.
Okay.
Where they're not going down is amongst young
Yep.
mothers. And you need to ask yourself why. You know, in this country, we think that there's about 500 kids who are living in Bangladesh with HIV. Only
500 kids.
only a couple of hundred of those are on antiretroviral treatment. What we know is these days AIDS is becoming more of a chronic disease than a killer. So we know that if you get treatment to people early enough, the level of HIV in their blood goes right down, almost disappears, sometimes does disappear and is not detectable in blood samples. And we've found in some cases, and recently, when they stop medication, if they've started early enough, it doesn't return. Now, that is not a cure. We call it a functional cure. But what we also know that is that for $5, you can use a couple of drugs like nevirapine, and if you give these to mothers who are HIV positive, the chances of their child being born HIV positive are, greatly diminished. So, I think in Bangladesh we have such few small numbers, it's inexcusable that there's a single child born with HIV. Inexcusable, because it's cheap and easy to do. Unfortunately, a lot of those mothers tend to be very poor and don't access services. So, it's very easy to do something about that. But getting back to your question, women, yes, look, I think women themselves in Bangladesh need to be their own spokesman. But there needs to be an environment that facilitates that. And I think there is one. There are some elements in society which I think push back on that.
Yeah.
But in the end, it means educating boys and men as much as it takes, to elevate the voices of women.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liokeni. With this, we'd like to take a short break. Dear viewers, with this, we'd like to take a short break. Coming back soon. Hello viewers, again we welcome you to Watch the Diplomats. We are talking to the country director of Unaids, Mr. Liokeni. So Mr. Liokeni, now my question is about your family, because family is very important for everyone. So if you could tell something for your family to our viewers.
Sure, I'm always keen to talk about my family.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very sad situation, Masood. I am an orphan now. As you know, my wife was here. She came a few years before me, so for a while I commuted from Geneva and New York and got a lot of frequent flyer points. She brought the two girls with us, with her, and they went to a local school here, and they've just graduated, and yesterday they left to go to university. My wife left to take up her new post as ambassador in Bucharest, and my son is in Australia.
Australia.
So I'm an orphan now.
You're an orphan. Come on. Thank you so much, Mr. Liokeni. Another question is Unaids. What is your current project here and the upcoming project? If you could tell something for the viewers again.
Well, we don't really work on a project basis. Our job is to help build the capacities of governments, civil society to help forge partnerships between UN agencies
true.
and donors, to make sure resources are there from Global Fund AIDS, TB and malaria, and really to ensure that the right data and strategic information is in place so that the response is having an impact, and then we monitor that as well.
Very
So
true.
it's an ongoing process. You know, so in terms of projects, we're not like a donor. We're
Okay.
You know, we have 11 agencies of the United Nations in what we call the joint UN team on AIDS, and our
Okay.
job really is to work and facilitate the work of government and civil society, there's a vibrant civil society here, and the AIDS response is very strong here.
True.
That's probably why the prevalence has been kept low. But you know,
So-
I forgot to say
Yeah.
before, Masood, the very worrying thing about the epidemic that is still going this way instead of that way is that, you know, our estimates, and these estimates are not sort of coming from the air, they're based on behavioural surveillance, they're based on previous data.
Okay.
And we've just done recent estimates, and we think there are around 10,000 people living with HIV
In Bangladesh.
in Bangladesh. Now, the real problem is we've only detected 3,200. So we're not getting people to be tested.
Mhm.
I mean, I
True.
would look into the camera and ask people, do you know your HIV status? And if they say no, you would say, why no? And if people ask me, why should I have an HIV test? I would ask them, have you had unprotected sex
Mhm.
with anybody? Your
Yeah,
wife or
true.
husband? Yeah. Have you had a blood transfusion?
Mhm.
Have you ever injected drugs and shared needles? You know, so I'm not saying everybody needs to be tested,
True.
but if those three things apply to you, you should get tested. There are many voluntary counselling and testing sites. By the way, they're confidential. Nobody's going to
Okay.
ring up your wife or your boss and say, hey, although we would encourage people if they're positive to make sure their partners know, protect
Yeah.
their partners, you know. So any hospital, any doctor, any health service, just ask them. If you don't know, come to Unaids and we will
Okay.
give you your, you know, an
Proper
address.
suggestion, yeah.
Well, we'll take you to the nearest, you know, centre where you can get an HIV test. I mean, I would suggest that every health checkup you have, next time you have a health checkup, ask your doctor. Just put on the sheet, please give me an HIV test. It'll be confidential. So
True.
that's the way to prevent epidemics. We estimate that about 75% of people living
True.
with HIV globally
True.
don't know they are positive.
True. So, you know, in Bangladesh, it's a religious factor, people are a little bit shy and conservative. They do not want to disclose these things. So, in terms of getting data, do you feel any kind of problem in collecting the proper data or something?
Because of religion?
Yeah.
I see religion as a very positive force to harness. I would love to hear imams in mosques saying
Yeah.
the same thing that I just said.
True.
You know, let me give you an example. I believe that Bangladesh is much more progressive than the place I'm talking about in Somalia. But
True.
I remember talking to imams in Somalia saying, you know, this will save lives if you can say to people,
True.
use condoms to save lives. And
True.
they did, and they saved lives.
Yeah.
I would like to hear every imam saying that in every mosque. I'd like to hear every
Wonderful.
teacher implementing life skills based education to keep people alive, you know. So, you know, I forgot to say, one of the very worrying issues in Bangladesh, now the data may have changed, but last time we did a nationwide survey. You were talking about the importance of young people. Less than 20% of young people, and we're talking between up to the age of 25.
Okay, 18 to 25,
yeah.
okay.
15 to 25.
Okay.
Less than 20% knew 3 ways to protect themselves from HIV. They didn't know, couldn't say at least, don't inject drugs, don't, make sure you use a condom, abstain from sex if you can, etc., etc. So they couldn't even name 3 ways to do it. Now that's appallingly low, and one of the lowest rates of knowledge by young people in the whole Asia Pacific region, and we must do something about that. The schools must do something about it. The mosques need to do something about
very
it.
Good,
and the young people need to do something about it themselves.
It's a very good advice, Mr. Liu Kenny. So the other day we have visited your wonderful office. So can you take a look on the screen, your office and little activity? Hello, Mr. Liu Kenny.
Hello, Masood. Thanks for giving me time.
Thank you so much. So how are you, Mr. Liu Kenny?
Well, we're fine. We're moving in the right direction.
You have served many countries around the globe. So how do you feel here in Bangladesh?
I would almost say which countries I haven't served in. We move around a lot. I'm an old fellow now. I'm close to retirement, so I've had upwards of about 10 to 15 postings from Geneva to South Africa, to Namibia and Kenya and Somalia, and worked in Southeast Asia.
Long experience.
Well, it's been good experience, but it's certainly been a pretty varied existence. A second ever Security Council resolution on HIV/AIDS and peacekeeping. And as you know, Bangladesh is the largest troop contributing country to help prevent HIV and prevent sexual violence in conflict. Is the draft, and then you will see the blue one is the one that went to the Security Council in 2011. This is quite interesting too, because if you're going to...
There is 10 minimum standards.
Right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liu Kenny.
It's a pleasure, Masood. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, last but not least, Mr. Liu Kenny, do you have any special message for the people of Bangladesh?
Yes, very much so. We, from UNAIDS, but from me too, I'm passionate about trying to get to 0 new infections and 0 AIDS-related deaths and 0 discrimination. Unless you address that discrimination, you won't get to the other zeros.
True.
And but AIDS is beatable, and it's beatable if we really think about evidence-based responses, and those evidence-based responses tell us get the right data, ensure the rights of people, and Bangladesh can be an AIDS-free nation.
Thank you so much. So definitely they come to know from this show a lot about it. And one thing I left basically, what is the program in terms of making awareness to the people? Do you have any special kind of program or anything?
Yes, there are massive programs through the National AIDS program and with Global Fund resources. There are strong efforts in schools and in communities. And by the way, I think the mass media has a tremendous role to play.
Absolutely.
And this kind of show, I really congratulate ETV for making this space available. We'd be happy to give you lots more information.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Liu Kenny, coming to our Diplomats. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.